Good evening. Welcome to Storyteller Studio. Sorry, apparently the audio file didn't want to play until the last third of that video. So we'll figure out why that's going on, because it wouldn't be Storyteller Studio if we didn't have a tech issue. But this is Storyteller Studio, the tabletop role-playing game talk show. I'm your host, Eric Taylor, and with me are my lovely, usual, mischievous bunch who are here to talk about tabletop with me. So we're going to go left to right. We'll start with Sarah. How are you this evening? Who are you this evening?
I am doing good, and this evening I am Sarah.
It's fair. And you can semi-find her on Twitter at Sarah No Tweet, but you can't really find her there, but sort of. Matt, you, however, we can find on Twitter. So tell us who you are and how you are.
Yeah, you can find the heck out of me on Twitter at orcish1_83. I'm doing well. I relate to the mischievous comment, your mischievous band of characters. So happy to be here, folks.
And last but certainly not least, see, I like to do Sarah last because then I can throw out the Resident Game Beast comment and it makes more sense. And it rhymes with last but not least. But our other person who's also fairly beastly game-wise, but isn't the Resident Game Beast, we have Chantel B. Hi, how are you? And who are you?
Hi, you just said my name. It's Chantel B. I'm the mischievous, but also, not mischievous at all component of this stream. Yep, you can find me at Chantel B on Twitter because that is actually where you will find me, unlike the resident #GameBeast.
No, you cannot find the #GameBeast, but you can try and get #GameBeast trending. We don't have enough viewers for that, but you can still try. So
I think we should.
We should. Go to Twitter now, and everybody tag at Sarah No Tweet and #GameBeast. Go now.
That would be amazing because no one would ever see it because
it's true.
Sarah would never see it.
It's true. And I had to reset my phone. So at present, I'm not even logged into Sarah's Twitter. So,
oh, wow.
For this evening, however, while our audience is off attempting to get #GameBeast trending, we will be discussing story pacing. And obviously in a tabletop RPG setting. But more specifically, we're going to focus on when to sit and let it ride and let it percolate and let it boil versus when to push and when to go. So, this was your topic, Shani. So talk to us about the inspiration for this topic and talk to us where you want this conversation to go, since this was kind of all you this week.
Oh my. So one of the things that I'm always interested in when we play games is when, as a group, we decide to sit down and kind of go, okay, so this is the scene that we're in, this is the moment that we're in, and we're going to stay in this moment. And this is the depth of the moment and see how deep it goes versus when to say, all right, we've kind of sat here for long enough emotionally and in terms of our characters have sat in this one place physically for long enough. It's probably time to move on. So in terms of the discussion, I'm interested in when that happens, how we know that it's time for that to happen. And, anything associated with that, really.
Okay. So I'm going to end up coming at this from a very different angle, I think, than everybody else, because my angle is going to be primarily GM, right? I have to look at this from the angle of how long do I let you percolate as players versus when do I drop more stimulus and more plot hook and more push in, when do I flip the switch on the conveyor belt and move you forward, whereas when do I keep it off and let you walk? So, Sarah, you were in Somerset City this past weekend and will be in there henceforth all the weekends. But there were some moments this weekend where I threw story at you and said, okay, it's time to go. While you guys were technically trying to have a moment. So talk to me about your interaction with that, as someone who does get kind of pushed along. I think you can vouch for the fact that you tend to play in groups that are very indecisive and sit around and talk about what you're going to do for a really long time before you do it. So talk to me about your experience with Somerset City this weekend, and then talk to me just in general about that push and that drive to have story thrust upon you rather than find it yourself.
Well, I can think where we were in the cafe, it was kind of nice to let us sit there and interact and have time being in the cafe. But we did eventually reach a point where you kind of had to push us out the door and be like, okay, it's time to move on. You've sat there with your drinks and your cinnamon rolls long enough. It's time for something to happen. So, and then speaking for the indecisive part, we did, Blue and I reached a point where our characters were like, well, we're not going to run towards gunshots. That would be forcing the story in a different way, where you make your character do something that would be out of character just so you can go see what's happening in that part of the story. But at the same time, we were sitting there going, I don't know what we're gonna do. There's a lot of ums in those moments when you're being indecisive, and you're like, okay, you have 5 seconds, figure out what you're doing.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to throw you under the bus for a minute, Matt, if you're okay with that, because we've been friends a long time. If you don't want me to, you can be like, no.
Well, content is content. Go for it.
All right. So, in your history as a gamer, and it has drastically improved over the 3 years we've been playing games together, but in your history of gamer, you have been known to have metagame issues where you want to know the story as it's going on for your character. And so you have had attempts and times where you have done exactly what Sarah just described, where something that wasn't quite in character or wasn't quite in story took place to put you in a position where you got story.
And I remember my first character, you had to remind me a few times, he had D4 smarts and couldn't predict the next step, the way that he was trying to.
So talk to me about that. Talk to me about letting the story... That's another version of pacing, I think. Talk to me about letting the story evolve out of sight of your character. And
sometimes you have to let the story grow around you. And it's there are times when I have to occupy myself doing something that's not plot oriented, but just character appropriate. There are moments when I had a character who had a quirk, and that quirk was public urination. So if he didn't know what to do and the party was arguing about something, he'd go find a tree and water it. And that was a little bit of a running gag for that. And there are a couple of tools that I've used, and hopefully new gamers benefit from my perspective. I will do something character appropriate and not plot oriented, or I will do the next moderately risky thing that can happen in the plot. I like excitement. I like the fast furious fun that's available through our gaming format. And so I do the next moderately risky thing, or I play to my hindrances. So if being reckless is one course of action, I'll be reckless and let the party put me in check if that's what's appropriate. So play to character. And you're right, I do like story to go along. We've talked in past episodes about I like character and story. Those are the kind of two high points for me. And so being able to let it grow around me a little bit and give other characters the opportunity to move plot forward is something that I just have to pay attention to.
And in my opinion, for what it's worth, you're getting a lot better than you were 3 years ago.
Neato.
So that's a good thing. Shani,
Well,
go ahead.
sorry.
Sarah.
I was just going to say, sometimes as another person who's a player, sometimes it's hard to know that something cool is going on where your character isn't, and you want to just find a way to force your character into that scene, even though whatever it is, your character wouldn't go there or wouldn't know that's going on. And sometimes it's hard just to let it keep happening without you getting to interact with it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you guys all in Somerset City again, the two of you, Chantel and Sarah, experienced that this weekend where you guys have been fighting for a session 0 and all of session 1 to see the painting Man on a Bike. But you couldn't get to see Man on the Bike, and then Man on the Bike came to life and was attacking Jeff's character in a room you were not in. And I will be honest, as a GM, I was waiting for someone to essentially try to push themselves into the gallery to see Man on a Bike. Even though it wasn't something that made sense for your character. So let's talk about that. Shawnee, you are one of the people I know who... These are actually the 3 people I know in gaming most who will make a decision strictly for character reasons, regardless of how suboptimal that decision is, regardless of how much crap that's going to throw into a fan, and no matter how much the world will burn around them, they will make a decision for plot-related reasons. So, talk to me about pushing your story forward as a character versus pushing the primary plotline forward by doing those suboptimal things.
I think I'm going to need some clarification on that one.
Well, so I don't necessarily have any examples, but I feel like you are a person, you are a player who will make decisions suboptimally, right?
Yes.
For roleplay purposes. You plot advances for roleplay purposes. You're the kind of individual who, if you're playing D&D, would be like, it makes sense for me to have one level of mage because my character thinks magic is cool. And I will take no other levels in mage for the rest of the time, but I will have this one level. On some level, I think there are those who would argue that that is advancing your story, possibly at the detriment of the primary story, because now you are less functional.
Okay. So that's where I ask a question of what is the primary story and to what extent is behaving for your character making them less functional for the story.
Okay.
Because ultimately my argument would be there that what I'm doing is making them more story appropriate because I'm doing something that functions in aid of the story, not in aid of, you know, making them the most heroic, if that makes sense. Because usually the idea of TTRPGs is like you're following a group of people in their story, and whatever that story happens to be is what I would argue is what I'm doing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that, and let's get the perspective of everybody around the table. We're a group of people who come from very different backgrounds of things. I think that the 2 people to your left on camera are individuals who, for most of their RPG life, have very much wanted to be on Rails because it was a comfort thing to play on Rails. So, and they're very recently, I have an analogy, which is you go from being on a railroad to you go from riding on Pirates of the Caribbean, where the track is set, but you can't see it because it's underwater and you have a little bit of sideways play, but you're always going to go in the same direction. And so for quite a while now, they've been playing in Pirates of the Caribbean type railroading. And only very recently, with these past, I would say 2 games, Stars That Bind and Somerset City, do they have full, not freedom, they've always had freedom, but they have taken full control of their own destiny in that sense, where they're going wherever the winds of the story will take them. You've played a lot of modules in your history. I think the argument there would be that a module is written to go to point X, right? If you can't, if a character choice that you make for your roleplay story, which I'm not in any way villainizing whatsoever, let's make that very clear, chat. But if you make a roleplay choice to take a level of mage rather than another level of barbarian, and you miss out on your 8th level power, and you guys get your trash kicked by the very plot-lined boss in your module, have you not then chosen your story over the party's?
I feel as though there's a balance to be struck between what works into what is story and what is suboptimal.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, if you're looking at a game like D&D, it's so heavily balanced that it almost doesn't matter if you take a level in every single class. You're probably going to come out with something that's painful to play, but will still be functional. Like you'll still be, it will be
even worse to GM. Don't do that.
I mean,
players.
yeah, no, don't do that. Absolutely don't do that. I would never, there is no story reason why you would do that. I can't imagine a story reason why that would happen. But if you were to do that in a game like D&D, it would still work. You'd still have the powers that you need in order to succeed. It's just about then really listening to the other players in your team and going, okay, well, right now, how can I best support you? Like the character goes from being like a main fighter to a support character because all of the things they do could support what's happening. Mm-hmm. Which very much probably takes us, oh no, it's still in story pacing because it's about, whether or not the story that you've individually got pushes the group story forward or whether it holds the group story back. And it all kind of comes down to how you play the character, because that one character with all of their random levels might suddenly have a lot higher charisma, for example. So they might be awful on a battlefield, but great when it comes to, persuading or influencing others. And so it's that kind of rebalance that starts to happen.
Okay. So Sarah and Matt, in this same pacing conversation that Shawnee and I have been having, let's hear your thoughts on the idea of making a character choice at potentially slowing or impeding advancement of your group story. And let's focus on group story rather than main plot, because I do think that, Shawnee, you nailed that on the head as to what I was trying to get across. Talk to me about that. Are there times where you've been guilty of that? Are there times where you have experienced that and it was either a frustration or it turned into something really cool?
So for me, I had this myopic view. I'm like, I project my preferences and feelings on the other players in the party. And I think that if they like character and story half as much as I do, they'll enjoy what my character does for the story. But so I do choose character over main plot sometimes. The fact that we are upgrading from Pirates of the Caribbean to free open range, such that my character Hawk, considered mutiny, considered selling out his team, and then held it against somebody else who almost kind of halfway flirted with the idea. And then, like the fact that that character has decided, okay, we can look out for us and we can be freelancers available to the highest bidder, has allowed me to make some choices that were just mine. I remember my first game, and I've talked about this before. I was an orc. I was overconfident. I was battle tested. I decided to challenge a dragon single-handedly. It was terrible for the main plot line because it looked like we were all going to die because they were trying to save my behind. And I think that it made for a much better story because when we actually did confront the dragon, we didn't try a brute force attack. We used a mind control spell, and we basically puppeted the dragon to be able to defeat it. And I think that was a better outcome, partly because I broke some glass and took us in a suboptimal path, but it was character appropriate and forced us to think creatively.
Okay. So Sarah, what about the other end of that spectrum? You've been involved in a lot of games where character choices have brought games to an end. So talk about that. Talk about the and this is, I guess we should have probably retitled this episode to be like story pacing and story elements, because we're kind of mixing the two, but I think they're inherently linked. But talk to me about that, about being in situations where another character has made a character decision that has gotten the rest of you killed.
Well, maybe. Can I do something a little bit different?
It's
I
an
was
open
thinking.
conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking of the story that has definitely influenced all the other games that we've played after, because like you said with our game now, how we are not on rails anymore, but I still find myself trying to look for the plot hooks and how can I help progress the story that way, and what are we supposed to be latching on to that we're not, because I was in a story where my character decided they didn't like a certain we had a little jewel that had like the soul of a gnome in it, and I decided my character didn't trust or like that gnome due to certain things that had happened, and a certain character who had trusted that object completely had died. And so as we were going along, the character that ended up in charge of that little object was like, I don't know what this is. I toss it to the side. And my character was like, yeah, good. I never liked that stuck up gnome in that jewel anyway. And then the one person who might have been like, no, wait, I'm going to go back and pick that up. He was like, should I go back and pick it up? Because we're like, we'd left it a couple yards behind at that point by the time his character noticed. And my character is like, no, we don't need, we're moving on, leave it there. And I didn't realize at the time, like me personally, I did not realize that that was the ultimate plot hook in our story. And we had just completely thrown that story to the side and left it behind. And because we had done that, that meant that story was no longer continuing. That story was over until our characters left and got back to an inn and we were done with the game. And Eric was like, well, you guys just ditched my plot hook. That story's done. And I was like, wait, what? I didn't know that's what we were doing. So then I find myself in every game we've played afterwards, like, okay, where are the plot hooks? Which ones do we need to not leave behind? Like, I'm trying to find the rails just so we can stay on the rails, because I want to see where this story was supposed to go.
Mhm.
And so now I kind of have to train myself. Okay, there's no rails there. Just go where you want to go, because now I'm always trying to find, okay, where are those essential plot hooks that I need to make sure that we don't toss by the wayside.
Well, there will always be hooks. Like that's the thing about a story, right? That's part of story pacing. It's part of story elements. Is there will always be hooks, but there will be more hooks than you can tag. You can't investigate all of them, and it's just about choosing which ones matter most. We may have lost Shawnee, so for those out there in internet world, Chantel has been having internet issues today, and her being locked in one position generally means that we've probably lost her. So give me 1 second here.
I think bad internet is a better explanation than she's been petrified, so I'll take it.
It's true. So talking about pacing, again, let's kind of get back a little bit on topic. When have there been times, and it's your chance to throw me under the bus. When have there been times that you feel like I have just thrown too much at you, that my pacing has been bad, and how has that impacted your game?
So for me, I get thrown when we go from one dimension to another while keeping the same storyline or some variation of the storyline. And so, like, I'm actually incredibly entertained, and I'll talk to the audience at this point, by the moments when we frustrate Eric by saying we want to become apple farmers or open a bed and breakfast or stay here with the innkeeper and learn his curry recipe. Like, that's a lot of fun for me. And it is kind of an organic outgrowth from story pacing being a little slow, or us not being able to find the rails. Those are fun moments for me, but they're difficult for a GM to rein in and get back on path. So I really like that. If you can frustrate your GM just a little bit, be fair. Go for it. Explore that.
Yep. What about you, Sarah? Have there been times where either side of that, where you were not given enough pacing wise, or you were just given too much pacing wise, and it was too hard to handle, and the story for you fell apart?
There was that one night when we were playing Supers. It was a different Supers game, and you had all these clues set up for us. I don't know if this, I can't say it was completely a failure on your part, but I sure felt like a failure. You had all these clues for us, and we had fun. I mean, we still had fun, but we could not figure out where in the story these clues were supposed to be leading us. And you were like, well, just pull up a map of, like, a Google map of Paris. And so we tried that, and we stayed lost for, like, I don't know, another 30 minutes or so. And you're like, well, try this. So not even in-game clues. You were finally just, look at it this way, try looking at that way. And so finally, by the time we were done, we still had fun. I want you to know we still had fun role playing with each other because we're all friends and we were still having fun. But by the end of the night, I was just like, I don't know if those were just really bad clues, or the three of us who are playing are just really dumb, because we could not. You finally just said, you're supposed to go here. You're like, oh, okay, cool. We go there. Because it just wasn't working.
Yep. Nope. I remember that. I don't remember the clues specifically at this point, because it's one of those. I'm an individual who I will throw stuff at the wall, both pacing wise and game mechanics wise and story wise, and see what sticks. And that was definitely an example of it did not stick. So what about you, Shawnee? You're now back, I think, temporarily. Good news. My transition was fairly seamless when you left and then returned. But have you been in a situation where either too little push from your GM or too much shoving you from behind from your GM has hindered your game? We may have lost Shawnee again. So we're going to move on to the next question, and if Shawnee returns, yep, there she goes. Now she's back.
Yeah, she is.
It's okay, everyone.
It's okay.
Shawnee's here.
It's okay. I'm here. Everything's okay now.
Now we have to transition back. Okay. So, that question is still for you.
Too little or too much push?
Mm-hmm. Rip Australian internet. Okay. Matt and Sarah, let's chat then about something else. Is there such a thing for players or for GMs as forcing the story? Against the grain, against people's will, against whatever. Is there such a thing as forcing the story?
I think there is. when you're so focused on advancing the story that you throw characters out the window, right? If it's something that they're not going to do or inclined to do or motivated to do intrinsically, that's forcing the story. There's also, times, I think, Eric, you may have some perspective on this, where you were open and letting the team explore things that were not part of the intended story, and it got a little wide for you to be able to rein in. So yeah, there's hazards on both sides.
It is a side effect of being an improv GM. You guys will just sometimes go and do something I'm not only just not prepared for, but never even would have thought of in a million years. Example is in Stars That Bind, Ren pulling his gun on his own science officer. Wasn't even in my mind, because I know Jeff as a player. That was not within character for Jeff as a human being. So, go ahead, Sarah.
I was actually going to use this as another instance, and I asked him if I could pick on him a little bit. But if you remember our game where he was playing an elf, he had a bow, he was like a ranger. And we had a dwarf who was really good at talking to people. And so we were all hiding while she was talking to this half-orc, trying to find stuff out. And her scene where she was talking to him had been going on for quite a while we were hiding, but she was doing good at getting the information that we wanted. Even though he was hostile, he hadn't attacked her, at least yet. And Jeffrey in this instance, was getting sleepy. He was getting kind of bored because he wasn't really involved in the scene. And even though I don't think his character would have done this, and he's not here to say what he thinks, but he just pulled out his bow and shot the half-orc just because he was tired. He wanted to get going. He wanted more action. He wanted the story to just move past this point where it was just the half-orc and the dwarf talking, and let's move on to something else. And so that was his way of forcing the scene to just move on. Mm-hmm. And in our story, it worked out okay. When the half-orc got hostile and attacked the dwarf was a warrior, so she was able to survive, and she in fact took him out, and it worked okay. And I asked him later, I was like, did you think about the fact before you did that about how it would affect her character? Because I don't think he did. Because if it had been my character that had been talking to this half-orc, she would have been desperately trying to make sure he didn't become more hostile and attack her, because she was a healer and extremely squishy, and also the only healer. So if she got hurt, she would have had a hard time healing herself. So I was just wondering when it happened, I was like, so did you think about the fact that if you did that, because you probably weren't going to one-shot that guy, that it would turn out okay like it did for the story? Or did you even consider the fact that it could put that character in a world of hurt and you could have even gotten her killed? Mm-hmm. So I think that's an instance where he got bored and tried to force the story to just move on because he was tired of that scene.
Okay. And that opens this conversation up, I think, with regards to story pacing as well. Is at what point, pacing-wise, is spotlight on one person too much spotlight? Right? Because that was an example where Candy had the spotlight for... That was a long conversation. Candy was quite good at the talking aspect of role-playing, didn't have a lot of the self-consciousness that at the time a lot of the other players in the group did in terms of being in character dialogue-wise. And so that conversation went on, I think it was like 15-ish minutes of them talking. At what point is it too much? At what point does that character moment hamper storytelling? Or did it? Like, I mean, it doesn't sound like you feel that the moment with Candy did. Matt, you've been involved in games with our friend Ben, where Ben has done similar things to drive the story forward, but also for his own kind of giggles. At what point is it too much?
So I think social norms apply. It's kind of like asking, when is one person talking among a group of friends too much? And that will depend on the friends and the topic and several other things. So there are some things a GM can do to make room for a monologue or a character NPC interrogation or whatever it is, by allowing some of what would be natural side talk to happen. Um, so if the questioning were occurring and I said, and while she's doing that, I sharpen my axe, or, and while she's doing that, I, observe to my other party member that it looks like, the the NPC is getting hostile, right? Like allowing a little bit of organic side talk, because in real life, we would be able to do that, but because in TTRPG we're running everything through a GM, that can be a little bit difficult. But a GM being comfortable and players being adaptable and cognizant of the fact that the GM is going to have limited attention for them and the story and interrogation is going to have limited time for them, but allowing that little bit of crosstalk so that it's not just one person talking for 15 minutes can be helpful. And I'll stop talking now so as not to be guilty of my own issue here.
No, that's fine. I think we lost Chantel again. This will be the rubber banding Chantel episode. But okay, so right. So let's think of it that way. In the if social norms apply, when does it reach a point where you have to solve it out of character? Right? When does it reach a point where and I don't feel like necessarily you guys have been involved in that. I know I have, but I have many more years of gaming, but I don't necessarily think it has happened for you guys, but I could be wrong. When do you reach a point in your minds where you have to, out of character, address player to player with regards to pacing control or spotlight hogging or even player to GM? What is, in your opinion, the breaking point there?
Yeah, at about the 7-minute mark, I say, hey, GM, this other thing is going on, right? Bad habit or good, that's kind of where I find my limit. And I think I've seen you do it a couple of times, Eric, and I've seen it at conventions where a GM will say, okay, we'll put a pin in that conversation to catch back up on what the rest of you are doing. And I think that helps to be able to let a critical conversation continue without making everybody entirely checked out.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think I don't have a specific time, but when you find yourself being so frustrated with what's going on that you can't enjoy the game, or you're thinking of pushing your character to do things that are very out of character, then that's when you need to speak up and say something out of character that you're not having fun anymore. Go ahead and say something about it.
Okay, so we'll see if we can keep Shawnee connected long enough to get a response. I feel like a lot of the time you come from the opposite end of that spectrum where you will let a conversation go for 10, 15 minutes if it's plot relevant, if it's something that is it's good acting, it's good storytelling, it's good character development. So when for you do you say something either in character or out of character? What is your trigger, I guess, as much as that's not the best word to use given its other connotations?
My trigger would be generally there's sort of an arc to scenes. There's sort of a journey that a scene will go through. And for me, it's a case of the scene goes up, the scene comes down as we get to that point of the denouement is when I kind of.
Okay. So let's talk about the difference between waiting it out versus indecision, and we'll kind of backtrack a little bit here. One of the things with regards to do respite very specifically that I have become more cognizant of is silence, is downtime, is the just gaps in conversation or in action. It's things that Chantel has pointed out. It's things that other audience members have pointed out. And in Stars That Bind, I will throw you guys under the bus again because we're friends. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of these moments where you guys go, and in radio there would be dead air, right? At a table, sitting around without a camera in front of your face, that's less of a big deal. It still can get to the point where I'm like, okay, let's go. What are we doing? But when is it silence and lack of decision and lack of like thought process versus dramatic pause? Either anybody who wants to answer.
Here's the dramatic pause to give effect to your question. I feel like there is a certain pause following something meaningful that would be present in a live in-person conversation, or in a character conversation. So I feel like if there is a GM out there trying to squelch every moment of pregnant pause following some big revelation, that's probably counterproductive. And for me, when it becomes indecision, where people are like looking back and forth to each other for somebody else to please make a decision or say something, is when that might be a signal that there's either too much information or not enough information for the party to move something forward. For me, I try to divine whether it is truly people are contemplating what just happened or combating indecision. A lot of that is body language, but some of that is contextual based on, if there's 7 paths in front of us, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to commit to a decision than if there's 3 paths in front of us. And so I will do a lot of talking it through until somebody either agrees or disagrees with something I'm saying, and we can kind of move it forward based on the attitudes that come.
And I think that that's the appropriate way to do it. I think that going forward, especially just in game in general, be it on camera or sitting around a table, talking it through is what needs to happen. But then it becomes a question of meta, right? Then that's a different conversation, is metagaming, and that's a whole show in and of itself. Right. But being able to go through, okay, this is what we're doing. You're filling that space. You're giving other people information. Nobody's attention is perfect. My attention is not perfect. Even as the GM, and players' attention aren't perfect. Sarah could be distracted by Faye. There's phone issues. There's people in the house. There's whatever.
Right.
So talking it through has those benefits, and I think that's something that Shani says. And Shani is here, in theory, in audio, and this is a topic that you mentioned, Chantel, is talking it through, and the idea of the pause, the dramatic pause versus the silence and the absence of action. What are your thoughts on talking it through?
I'm really hoping I'm not roboting, but we'll see how we go. There's a lot to be said for the feeling of silence, I tend to find. And when we sit in a place of silence. I don't know about anyone else, but I really can feel the difference between we don't know what we're doing silence and we know exactly what we need to do silence, or this is just a moment my character is having silence. And they vary. And I think different GMs will either give those silences the space they need or move them along. But also the players can do that too. And there are times when I'll sort of go, okay, we're being silent. Let's just make a choice and go with it.
Yep. I think going back to Somerset City again, you guys had those moments where there was definitely the moment with Denver and Margaret standing in the parking lot doing very little, where I could tell it was just indecision. And so I hit the point where I was like, you have 5, you have 4, you have 3, you have 2, you have 1, and then we're just moving past you, right? Your character literally just stands there and does nothing. Frozen in indecision. Whereas in the finale, when you had, or in the climax of the episode, where you had the bomb go off at Von Moon's press conference, and you had the phone ring in Julie's pocket and those kind of things, those were moments where I could tell the silence was more, wait, what? What's happening? And it feels more natural. Unless we have any other commentary on that, there is a question in chat that I do want to answer. Going once, going twice, sold to the chat. Frito asks, and he is an individual learning to roleplay and getting into the hobby, so this is a very appropriate question. Is there concern about the same player always being the next person to talk after the storyteller lays out a scene? What are you guys' thoughts? As I notice it as a GM when it's happening, but whether or not it's necessarily a bad thing, I think varies from group to group. But what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a big piece of it is whether it's in character or not. I come to game for characters to tell a story, and if a bias toward action is something that's in character, then I'm for it. But if you're playing a character that's active rather than passive as well, your characters may have some strife about that, and that's appropriate because that's a rich and engaging and convincing story. So you kind of have to, it will determine the amount of fun that you have, and maybe it's the right group you're gaming with and maybe it's not. But if you have chosen a more passive character, or a character who will get engaged if it's something that they're particularly interested in or skilled at, then you might be the first one to talk based on that true picture of character.
And I think this is also another topic that you could almost do a whole show on, because it's good if you're in an indecisive group to have someone who won't let those pauses go too long and who will kind of take the leader position and speak up. But I played in a game at Gen Con where this very enthusiastic role player got the character who is basically the leader of our group. And then he proceeded to always be the person to first talk to all the NPCs. And he pretty much didn't let anybody else in the party talk. And while I was shy in the beginning and so willing to sit back and kind of be a little bit more of a spectator, towards the end, I was quite a bit frustrated because I kept feeling like I didn't get to do any talking and I got talked over. And I didn't really feel like, except for in the battles where you roll initiative, because we were playing D&D, so I had to have a turn because that was my turn that I rolled. I didn't feel like I got to really participate because he kept talking all the time to everyone, even if I was trying to get someone's attention and say something.
And I think I agree with both of you. And I think that's where I go into, like, in acting we call it active listening. In psychology we call it active listening as well, actually. um the importance for me isn't so much on who speaks first. The importance for me is that everyone's words are equally important. There's no one in the group that is more important than anyone else. So like you can have a character like me who just waffles on and on and on, but there is importance and strength in those characters that don't say a great deal, but when they do speak is so heavily weighted that everyone takes notice of those.
And I agree. I think it is fundamentally a respect thing, as well, because this is a collaborative game. It's a collaborative story. You're working together. If you want to tell your own story, write your novel, take your friends on a hike and sit around a campfire and tell them your story, right? Do those things, and then you get to write everything yourself. But in a TTRPG, you're working together with your friends, and you need to be respectful of those decisions. And it is about building that character relationship. It's about understanding, you're going to have, Matt is frequently very inclined to play face characters. It's something that Matt does quite a bit, because Matt is a charismatic, outgoing person. So that aspect of Matt bleeds into character, frequently. And there's nothing wrong with that. But people then recognize that that's the kind of character that's being played, and then you build around that. In Stars That Bind, it has become it's Ghost's job, right? Ghost is the captain. It's Ghost's job in a lot of those situations to be the one who speaks first and the one that people looks to. In Paris by Night, there are actually several tense scenes purely in character, not actual tense scenes between Eric and Vera, where two very alpha personality characters in Kiaran and Moonin go head to head about who's going to take the lead. So mostly I think it comes down to establishing that respect and establishing the in-character dynamic. And if issues arise, discuss it out of character, and make it clear. Because we have had times where it gets brought up in character. It's like, hey, there's a lot of this, and I don't feel like I can get a word in. And I don't feel like very often people are intending to do that, at least not in the groups that I have played with. But let's go ahead.
I as you were talking, realized that I might take for granted the fact that games that you GM, you ask for thoughts, comments, and concerns at the end of every session, and you also engage with your players in between sessions. And that has given me opportunities to say, oh yeah, I really enjoyed game. So-and-so seems to be making a lot of plot decisions or something like that. And allowing for everything to be collaborative and there to be a safe space to talk to the GM about, yeah, it'd be perfect if, like, it was great, but it'd be perfect if, has been helpful for our maintaining long-term groups, and keeping everybody having fun. So kudos to you. And that's also just something, if your gaming group doesn't already do a thoughts, comments, and concerns recap after game, or if your GM, isn't welcoming of feedback in between session, try to bring that piece of culture with you, and make it a part of your practice.
Yep, I agree. Let's hit our closing thoughts from everybody on pacing. We'll start with Chantel off in Audio Neverland. Give me your final thoughts on pacing, anything that we didn't hit, that we should have, or anything that you want to really nail and really punch home to our audience.
Don't be afraid of silence if you're sitting in the middle of a scene with another character and you feel like you get the kind of edging feel that something is going to shift for your character. It's okay. The rest of the people around the table are kind of interested in seeing that to a certain degree. Don't do it every 2 minutes, but like there are times when it's important to just let that character development happen to help with the rest of the story.
For sure. Matt.
So when it comes to pacing, let it breathe and let it take your breath away. I like a little bit of fast-paced action and character-based authenticity. So taking risks is great. Playing to your character is great. If you do those things, story will move forward. You'll have a great time.
And game-based.
And try to remember that it's okay if your character isn't in every cool scene that's going on. You shouldn't have to try and force your character to do something out of character just to be in that part of the story. It's better if you just let them not be a part of that scene, maybe.
As an individual, in social situations, my wife harps on me to read the room fairly regularly, because it's not a skill that I have in social situations, but it is very applicable to your RPG. But even more than reading the room and reading your crowd, read your game. If you're playing a Vampire the Masquerade game, that's a slow burn. You're not necessarily going to have big, huge action set pieces every single game. There's going to be a lot of talking. There's going to be a lot of that slow, methodical, behind the scenes machinations kind of stuff. If you're playing Indiana Jones and a pastiche of that, stuff's going to blow up, stuff's going to fall down, and stuff's going to get broken. That's the gig. So read your game, get to know the people that you're playing with, establish a dialogue and a trust with the people that you're playing with, and as with every other aspect of RPGs, make sure you're having fun. And if the pace isn't fun, examine personally why the pace isn't fun for you, and then have a conversation with your GM and have a conversation with your fellow players and see what can be worked out. Those are my suggestions with regards to pacing. So I want to thank everybody who came out and watched tonight's episode, joined in the discussion with us in chat, retweet us on Twitter, all those things. It means a lot to us. I'm going to go through, do a quick recap of what's coming up for the week, and then we'll hit people for various personal plugs. Tomorrow night on Do Respite, there will be a Burning Wheel one-shot run by Flounder of the 12. The players in that are a little bit in flux, but that will be tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time till midnight, usual Do Respite times. Wednesday night, we have In the Shadow of the Cone, which is a kind of creepy-ish sort of one-shot where you're going to see some new faces. You'll see 2 people you've never seen before. So that should be fun. Again, 9 p.m. right here on twitch.tv/Do Respite. We'll start with Sarah, the resident game beast. Talk to us about where we can find you, what you're involved in here with Do Respite, and what you're involved in that's coming up, say, on Saturday.
Come watch me on Saturday. I will be playing Margaret again. It's going to be lots of fun to get to play her more often. And you can find me here. You can tweet me. I just won't see it, but you can if you want to. Chat with me here on Do Respite, though, and I will most likely see that.
It's true. Matt, tell us about the recent change to Stars That Bind, and then tell us where we can find you and how to interact with you.
Yeah. Well, we are such fans of Stars That Bind and the people who watch it that we want to keep you in suspense about what our next leg of the adventure is going to be. So Stars That Bind will convene again on the 28th. You can join me as Hawk to see how me going toe-to-toe with Ghost winds up. and we'll be happy to see you then. Tweet me at orcish1_83 for a good time. See ya.
For a good time. Keep that in mind.
Hey, I needed to deliver the mischievous
Your
thread that you
DMs
promised.
are going to be a scary place, and I don't envy you that now. Shawnee B, tell us where we can find you. Plug what you're doing this week, because heaven only knows you're doing a lot. Shawnee B may not be there. It is possible. So,
Heaven does know I'm doing a lot.
go ahead, Shawnee.
You can find me at Chantel B on Twitter. I am doing a lot this week. I just looked at my diary. I will be here tomorrow for Burning Wheel. I will be here again on Wednesday US time sometime for that one shot that Eric just mentioned. And I will be wait, hang on. Yes, okay. I will also be at the Roll Society for a D&D game, and then that same day US time, but still the same day for me as well, I will be back again that same day for the weekly game of Somerset City. That is my week.
So Sarah is our resident game beast, and Chantel is our resident game crazy person.
Hello.
I'm Eric Taylor. I will be engineering tomorrow's Burning Wheel, but I won't be playing. I will be running the Wednesday one shot, and I will be running Somerset City. Just for clarification, Somerset City is now a weekly game. It will be running every Saturday. We've received feedback from the community that alternating games every other Saturday was getting confusing and people were missing what they wanted to see, or they were coming with expectations to see something and then they would stick around for both, but they would be disappointed. And so we just worked out schedules such that Somerset City will be every Saturday at 9 p.m. Stars That Bind, for scheduling reasons with regards to players, is every other week, but it will be moving to every other Friday night. And you can just watch Twitter for when that will be. And like Matt said, it will be the next game of that will be on the 28th, because things like, Valentine's Day this week get in the way of that, and then other commitments for people. So, my name's Eric Taylor. These have been my friends. This has been Storyteller Studio. Thanks for joining us for our discussion about pacing. We hope that you learned something. We hope that you had fun. Thanks for hanging out in chat. We'll see you on our various shows this week. But until next time, for Sarah, for Matt, for Chantel, and for myself, this has been Do Respite. Check us out on Twitter. Check out dorespite.com. And we'll see you all next Monday for another show. Bye, everybody.